Show us how to stand up strong. Waiting for you takes so long. Shadows leave us standing naked. Become faking. This is what I can. Waking to these sounds again, I wonder how I'll sleep. Passing out is taking off into the stubborn deep. Like to meet a human who makes it all seem clear. To work out all these cycles and why I'm standing here, I'm falling over and over and over and over again now. Falling over and over and over and over again now. Running through my life right now, I don't regret a thing. Things I do just make me laugh and make me wanna drink. I'd like to meet a madman who makes it all seem sane. To work out all these troubles and what there is to gain, I'm falling over and over and over and over again now. Falling over and over and over and over again. Projecting what I want is always hard to know. When it comes between my sides, I let the damage show. I'd like to meet a spaceman who's flying the going on. Sailing through the stars and night until our world is gone. I'm falling over and over and over and over again. And over and over and over. And over and over again. And over and over again. Locked in a cell for your very last breath. How can it be that this is your death? Something is stirring away underneath as people ignite through a last burning rage. Friction is turning to fire. Friction is burning much higher. Been in high places, can't understand how to end troubles in this broken land. They have no idea and no feelings for love. Stand in the dogs and they stand all above. Friction is turning to fire. Friction is burning much higher. Let's see what's in the people talk about fight. I start to think them on the time. I be up with some bugs and I'm a copy like a baby. What I for the next that get what I like a lot don't be the night time. That's why the jungle sees. That is the vision. Flames like the stream. Danger in droves as we feel the heat. Coming together. Time is not right. Think for yourself and forget all the hype. Friction is turning to fire. Friction is burning much higher. Friction is turning to fire. Friction is burning much higher. To fire.
platforms like Instagram, YouTube, and other social media sites. So we'll kick off our session from a beautiful message from Sergio Tomberini. He's the president of SMI, Sistema Moda Italia. Hope I pronounced it correctly. So we'll start with a video message from the president of SMI.
Buongiorno, grazie a tutti per l'invito a questo evento. Auguro a tutto il convegno di oggi, a tutta questa convention sulle fibre naturali, un buon lavoro e lo auguro sia come amministratore delegato di Ratti, ma soprattutto come presidente di SMI. Tenere oggi e discutere oggi all'interno di un consesso ampio e articolato come questo di fibre e di tessile è qualcosa in questo momento di particolarmente, mi viene da dire, quasi coraggioso, visto e considerato il momento particolare che stiamo vivendo. Sono usciti i dati in Italia, i dati Istat, il calo che era già evidente per gli operatori è consolidato intorno al 20%, non accenna fermarsi in questo momento difficile e quindi siamo davanti ad un momento di crisi particolare in cui è giusto poi dall'altro canto che il sistema si trovi a riflettere e a discutere su quali sono i valori e quali sono gli argomenti per quello che riguarda il mondo del tessile abbigliamento futuro che abbiamo davanti. Siamo innegabilmente in un momento difficile, in un momento di crisi. La comprensione se questa è una crisi di carattere congiunturale o è una crisi di carattere strutturale. Probabilmente c'è un po' di entrambe le componenti e le parti strutturali riguardano alcuni elementi che stanno arrivando a conclusione delle loro attività in questi anni. La crisi della Cina, il ceto medio occidentale che ha dei problemi di capacità di spesa e così via. È chiaro che stiamo portando a compimento un percorso che ha visto un percorso difficile, un percorso complesso, un'evoluzione anche però significativa di tutto il mondo della moda. Alcuni elementi che erano dati per scontati oggi non lo sono più. In questo senso l'organizzazione di SMI, che ricordo a tutti è la più grande organizzazione nel mondo occidentale per quanto riguarda la produzione di tessile e abbigliamento, sta lavorando su diversi fattori. Prima di tutto è il valore e la qualità dell'associazionismo come elemento di sintesi per comprendere e per valorizzare gli elementi positivi di un mondo che è diventato complesso. Tra questi elementi c'è sicuramente un termine di cui oggi si è molto abusato, che è quello della sostenibilità. Un termine abusato perché è diventato un elemento con cui si fa premio su tutta una serie di prodotti che poi magari di sostenibili hanno veramente molto poco. Qui l'occasione deve essere quella, e credo che oggi nelle discussioni che andrete a fare, che avete fatto, sicuramente questo elemento della sostenibilità deve trovare una sua espressione veritiera. Ecco, qui ci sono degli elementi che devono trovare però poi la sintesi rispetto anche a quelle che sono le condizioni industriali del nostro settore, che è la necessità di tenere sulla sostenibilità in senso lato, perché quando parliamo di sostenibilità va bene la sostenibilità ambientale, ma abbiamo anche una sostenibilità sociale. Pensare che si possa ridurre o dimezzare, meglio ancora, la produzione mondiale di tessile e abbigliamento vuol dire perdere tanti quei posti di lavoro in cui la sostenibilità sociale poi va a rischio. Anche qua, sul tema della sostenibilità, credo che sarà uno dei temi fondamentali per voi, è quello di oggettivizzare l'elemento della sostenibilità. Oggi ci sono dei sistemi di misura che sappiamo non sono perfettamente consoni e meritano e hanno bisogno di una revisione. I ruoli di alcuni organismi come quelli europei sono fondamentali in questo, anche se alcune volte l'Europa spinge in modo eccessivo verso elementi che sono più tesi a degli aspetti ideologici che non a degli aspetti pratici. Il compito di un'associazione come quella di SMI è sicuramente quella di rappresentare gli interessi dell'intera filiera e di diversi ambiti della filiera in un contesto come quello europeo che è legislativo e di indirizzo. Diventa importante per d'altra parte per SMI avere gli input che arrivano da momenti aggregativi come quello che state vivendo, per cui quello che io
This event held in 2021 during COVID. It was an annual event called the Area Dressing Period. I wouldn't imagine that this event will become COVID. With physical presence and just not only but the other sessions that in the corner. We would like to finish before the night of the health, so people will have lines, information on the importance of solutions, and the different practices. I would like to thank participants coming from all over the world will be here in real life and in person, representing all the different states. One brokers, manufacturers, something else. Thank you very much for being here. Last but not least, I will never imagine that some of our best customers in the world would have opened the door to make you visit and see your city. As you know, we are not somebody and a little bit over. So I would like to thank all the customers and I would like to forget. So, Tecnicatura di Verona, Enrico Giugioni, Pazienza, Godello, Rega, Vegno d'Europa, Cinturriere Leone, Benedetto Magno, Magnata, Vittorio Ferrari, and Manchester City. When we launched our strategy together to get there, we was to promote three comprehensive cooperations between growers, workers, clients, and all the relevant stakeholders of our industry. And here we are. So I'm very proud that we achieved that. And I really would like to give us an applause. And I would like to give to a particular person an applause, because thanks to his vision, to his tenacity, to his empathy, we are all here. Thank you very much, Willie, because the Natural Fiber Connect would never exist without you. Thank you, Willie, really. Our idea is quite simple: work together for a future with more natural fiber, which means sharing ideas, connecting people, promoting best practices. Speaking about best practices, I'm really honored to introduce the first speaker, Gunter Pauli. I met Gunter, more than 20 years ago. I was working in slow food, and I had the fantastic opportunity to listen to one of his lessons about eco-design, system design at Politecnico di Torino. For those who don't know who Gunter Pauli is, the Huffington Post called him the Steve Jobs of sustainability. His Latino friends prefer to call him the Che Guevara of sustainability. He's an entrepreneur. He's an academic. He wrote 25 books and more than 360 fables for children. He is the creator of the zero emission standards in 1989, and he's the creator of the blue economy in 2009. His vision was adopted by a lot of people from industry, by United Nations and governments. He was advisor for many countries, from Argentina to Morocco, United Nations, Bhutan. Gunter, you will speak about it. He has a track record identifying innovative and sustainable growth sector, with more than 5 billion euros have been invested thanks to him in more than 200 projects around the world, giving 3 million jobs. Moreover, he's a friend, and I'm very proud and honored that he accepted to come here sharing his vision and his ideas. And he's a much better speaker than I am. So please, welcome with me Professor Gunter Pauli.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, there is no better person to introduce me than Elena. I think we admire in Elena her tenacity, her vision, and her straightforwardness in managing the family business. And I think this is what is very important. I'm not speaking to you today as a professor. I'm speaking to you as an entrepreneur as well. Where is the clicker? There you are. No, not that one. The clicker. Yes. Thank you. Grazie. No. So what to me is very important today is to share with you a little background about myself, because if you don't have a context of who's speaking, then whatever text I'm presenting to you is a pretext. So I'm providing you first a little context. And here you see some of the fractals that I think is very important. But in the present state of the world, we have to change the way we think. We can't just continue thinking the way you do. And therefore, the questions we're asking have to change as well. So the question when you look at this here is not, is the glass half full or half empty? That's the wrong question, because we know that the glass is always full with water and air. And so if you're asking, is the glass half full or half empty, you're only looking at the water. What about the air? And this is exactly the subject of my presentation this morning. Let's look at things you don't look at, because they're key. And because it doesn't come into your mind, in your picture, therefore we're missing opportunities. This is a company I took over in 1989. And it is a detergent company. It was the first biodegradable detergents company. Anyone here from England? Yes. So Sainsbury became my biggest client. And of course, when you have Sainsbury as a client, even this little factory in Belgium was able to move from 3 million to 70 million in turnover in 2 years' time. Now, whenever you have an MBA degree, they will tell you, you don't grow that fast. Why not? I mean, if you're an entrepreneur and you have Sainsbury as a client, build a new factory. I built a new factory in 9 months' time. They told me, you can't do it in 9 months. Why not? I mean, when the Chinese can build their People's Congress in 100 days, I can do my factory in 9 months. But in 1986, when the first report of the International Panel on Climate Change presented for the first time climate change, heating up of the planet, as a possible result of our overconsumption, I decided that the next factory I was going to build was going to be a zero emissions factory, a factory that had no waste, a factory that produced its own energy. And if you're a chemist, you know that producing soap is an exothermic reaction. You generate your own heat, so you don't have to worry about it. But also, it was the first factory in the world with a large grass roof, because the grass on the roof regulates the temperature on the inside. But you don't see any cars here. I was able to reduce the car park to the legally required car park for visitors because I paid my workers €0.50 a kilometer to ride the bicycle to work. You know what happens? When you pay people €0.50 per kilometer to ride a bicycle to work, everyone is on a bicycle. Even in the wintertime. I know I had to Rai, the Italian television, hiding at 7 o'clock in the morning in the bushes because they thought it was a marketing gimmick. They thought it was greenwashing, as we call it now. And then they saw these hordes of people arriving on a bicycle, and I had to create bicycle parkings, which in 1990 was kind of unique. But we were the first company that did it. And later on, since I had registered the term zero emissions, Toyota came to me and said, "We love your term, but we don't want to pay you." So as a result, I made an agreement with Toyota that I would release the zero emissions as a registered trademark on the condition they would run a 2-year campaign as Toyota promoting the concept of zeros of the future, the protector of the pregnant women. And what we need is to protect what we're going to birth, because we're going to birth a new model of business, and that model of business will be very different. At the moment, between today and 2030, I'm planning to build 100 of those ships as hospitals, as diving boats. We are planning to change the business model. And this is the result of one of my works at the Politecnico di Torino, where I taught system design, ecological design. This was the brief to my students. Would you be able to design me a cup of coffee with the sugar and with the cookie included in one product? And here you have it. I love it. You go to students and they will give you answers with so much enthusiasm that, of course, the question afterwards is, can we industrialize? This is the key. We have very creative minds, but are we able to industrialize and make money in it? Sorry for mentioning that number and that word, money. But this is how creative we have to be. But let me be very critical and play the Che Guevara. The market economy. It means you focus on a core business that will be built on a core competence, where you will always look for lower marginal costs. And that means that you will cut labor wherever you can to increase productivity. And you will aim for economies of scale, produce more of exactly the same, and therefore you will embrace outsourcing. That is meaning supply chain management, just in time, distribution centers, and cash flow is our king. Everything that we will do is to submit ourselves to the king of cash. We will leverage our assets to borrow money, to be able to grow further. And then the question is, are we really fitting into this globalization? What's the result? The result is today in the third world, massive youth unemployment. Communities, rural communities die. And I wonder, is cutting costs and being cheap the best way to go forward? It is not. And that is why the 200 plus cases that Elena mentioned has been my hallmark of work, to mobilize capital to invest in a different business model. That is not the green model, because whatever is good for you, whatever is good for your health, whatever is good for the health of the planet is expensive. That means it's for the rich. I'm sorry. I'm not the Che Guevara. I don't carry guns. I don't overthrow governments. And I'm not a medical doctor. But what is important to realize is that the green economy model has failed because it asks you to pay more. And therefore, I wrote a book and I developed the concept of the blue economy, where our focus is to be very innovative, highly competitive. You generate jobs, but you can only generate more jobs if you generate more value. And that means we have to have a fully integrated supply chain. None of the businesses that I have set up will do outsourcing. We don't do outsourcing. We have everything from the farm to the final product. And we have done that with meat, we have done that with plastics, we have done that with internet services. And we have succeeded. I'm not saying it's easy, because it's an uphill battle. But I have looked at it, for example, for sustainable building materials. This is the book that was published in the year 2000 by Vitra Design on grow your own house, not build your own house. And it was based on this work that we were able to achieve first in Colombia, and having the very first bamboo structure, 100% with natural materials, 0 emissions, and beautiful, I think, with a German building permit. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is the same building in Germany. We built it twice. But this building had a German building permit. Now, anyone from Germany here? Yes. German engineers are very solid, right? I mean, German engineering training. So when you convince a German engineer who's giving you a building permit to do it with bamboo, a material he's never seen, never worked with, never joined together, there is only one way to convince: science. You don't have the science? Forget about it. You have the science, and you are innovative, you are in. And that is the strategy that I have been pursuing. I wrote a book 20 years ago, Out of the Box. We are sitting as managers too much in the box. And this is another book of mine that was published called Economia in 3D. That means that if you look at agriculture and you're only looking at the acres, then you're missing the third dimension, volume. And if you do volume farming, I can increase the output of farms with a factor of 10, 20. And I don't need GMOs. I don't need genetic manipulation. I don't need the chemistry. I'm just using what works. My book, The Blue Economy Today, is in 60 languages. There are 23 governments that have decided to create a ministry for the blue economy. The last one was Nigeria. And what I think is very important is governments start realizing that the traditional promotion strategies for job generation, for innovation, is not just STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It is the change of the business model. And the blue economy is just one of those that I have worked on, but it is the business model that I would like to work with. And so therefore, anyone living on a coastal zone, who lives along the coast? Yeah. So this is a fish. So you've seen fishes before, right? So may I ask you the very rhetorical question, is this a male or a female? Can anyone in this audience tell me if this is a male or a female fish? Now, let me submit to you the wisdom of a child. If you don't know the difference between a man and a woman, what do you know? Nothing. So how are we going to tackle now the overfishing and the necessity to produce more protein, and you don't even know what is a male and a female? Even the scientists in the labs who are doing the feed for the fish and who are doing the hormones to make all female fish male fish. Because in the fish farming, all fish are male. Wondering why you have thyroid disruptions when you eat fish that has been treated from birth with hormones. So I'm asking the question, if you don't know the difference between male and female in fish, what else don't you know? And therefore, I'm quickly going through a few areas of reflection about natural fibers. The first one is, what's the source? What are you sourcing as a fiber? And I'm sharing the experiences I personally have with natural fibers. It's not about what I've seen and what ChatGPT tells me. It is about what do I know firsthand. And let me tell you as a little intermezzo. Last year, I was invited to New York, and I was asked to challenge ChatGPT. I asked 10 questions to ChatGPT, and none of them could be answered by the system. Why? Because ChatGPT only works with information that is already available. So how are you innovating? Nothing. You're not innovating. So therefore, we need to look at the source. After the source, I'm going to look with you at the color. And after the color, I'm looking with you at the system. So science is my basis. Ladies and gentlemen, nothing goes better on innovation than with the science. And to me, the most spectacular fiber that I know is the Edelweiss. The Edelweiss is the one that has these incredible fibers that allow ultraviolet at 2,000 meters to be exposed to this living organism, and it doesn't block ultraviolet like we have in our mind. It dissipates. Every fiber is 2,000 outlets of microfibers. And as a result, this beautiful flower from the Alps is able to be totally immune to ultraviolet. Wouldn't we like a dress like that? I mean, wouldn't that be a functional fiber that is of a great importance? And therefore, I want to say, not only look at the source of the fiber, look at the incredible functionality behind these fibers. And ultraviolet exposure, we know, is one of the issues we have to address. This is the oldest textile fiber of Europe. Ortiga in Spanish, the nettle. When you make a clothing out of nettle, then the clothing, that's the one we unearth when we do archaeology, because it just simply does not degrade. And the Ortiga is today still a very popular product used in Bhutan. But another wonderful source of fibers that I've worked with is the algae fibers. I mean, we have done thousands of hectares of regeneration of algae forests. The function of the algae forest is not provide you fiber. The function of the algae is to create a refuge for juveniles against predators. And as a result, it grows very rapidly because those juveniles leave a very particular type of excrements, and that allows these algae to grow 25 meters in a few months' time. So we harvest these fibers to make not clothing, although you could, but we harvest it to make biogas. The greatest source of biogas in the future is the capacity to produce gas from algae that grow faster than anything else because they don't have to fight against gravity. Here is a picture of our large algae farms that we helped set up in 1992. Today we have 17,000 women in Tanzania, on Zanzibar, Pemba, and Mafia, where we farm algae. And when you farm algae, you create a buffer for the forces of nature in the water. And that means that you generate a higher revenue and you eliminate dynamite fishing. Oh, we started with juveniles protected in the algae forest, and now we're eliminating dynamite fishing. That's the kind of thinking that we need in the future. But these algae are also incredible absorbers of microplastics. When we do the harvesting of our algae, we actually are picking up a lot of microplastics. We know microplastics is an issue. How can we not deal with it? Sorry, there was a little jump here. The only country in the world that is still using as a national product the nettle, Ortiga, is Bhutan. The national dress of Bhutan is made out of Ortiga. How many of you have worn an Ortiga suit? You've not been to Bhutan then? Or when you were in Bhutan, you took pictures and didn't wear it. What is very important is that we see that this nettle culture that we now are helping to further develop in Bhutan gives us clothing that is good for 3 generations. 3 generations, same clothing. You talk about sustainability? Well, then you make certain, like the kimono in Japan, that the mother can give it to the child and the daughter can give it to her child, and so on. Kimonos are kept for 200 years, 300 years. That's, of course, made out of a silk. Silk is a beautiful material, very well described. But what we very often forget is that the reason why silk became so popular is because the Chinese started putting mulberry trees in order to regenerate soil. Silk is the byproduct of a national strategy of China in order to regenerate topsoil. Because the mulberry will eat half of the leaves of a mulberry tree, and that is translated into excrements. And these excrements enrich the soil with microorganisms and therefore capture CO2. No one has looked at silk being this incredible instrument. And when we went from 1 million tons of silk to only 100,000 tons of silk in China, then I advised the Chinese government that this is the reason why you're losing your topsoil. One of those. And if you want to regenerate topsoil, promote the silk industry. This to me has been a project that we have been running in France for several years, and that's the byssus. Byssus is called the sea silk. I'm sure you know the sea silk. We are reintroducing the byssus material on a large scale because the mollusks are incredible filters. They are a necessary to keep the sea clean. They're the ones who are absorbing more microplastics than anyone else. But they're also securing the cycle of oxygen. And they have this capacity to attach themselves to a rock, and they overcome the greatest forces. The tensile strength of the byssus is superior to Kevlar. And as a result, this material that has always been looked upon as a waste material today is baled, collected, transformed, and we're making textiles out of it, just like it was the case 2,000 years ago. The sea silk is undoubtedly coming back, and we're going through an industrial process today, but the startup companies are fully funded, and we are moving on with this natural textile. I have worked for 25 years on the polymers, the fibers made by the spiders. You know, it's not for you to wear. That was a conclusion we came to. But you have to be able to see the functionality of these fibers, and they're incredible. Today, when you have a knee joint that is hurting you, they will put in an artificial knee. We've eliminated that, and within 2 to 3 years, we will have finally, after 18 years, the permits to inject silk in your knee so that the cartilage can grow again. This is fiber. And I think the science of fiber is an incredible inspiration. Here is on your right side, here is how the fiber is spun by the spider. And on the other side, you see the new machinery that we have put in place in Oxford University that permits us to actually spin the fiber the way the spider does it. So maybe you don't want to use the fiber to make clothing, but maybe you are very interested to learn how the yarn is being produced. Because the beautiful thing is that the yarn is super efficient because it is produced at ambient temperature and ambient pressure. You want to reduce your carbon footprint? Here is a way to think. This is spider silk textile. Yes, we experiment with that as well. The only problem is that spiders are not very easy to rear. It's easier to do it with sheep, I think. And so when you have thousands of spiders and you have to milk the spider for her polymers, I wish you good luck. So as a result, we are resorting to others. Here is me with the sheep in the Netherlands. We reintroduced the sheep in the Netherlands on these dikes. Who's here from the Netherlands? Thank you. Nice to meet you. Ik ben van België, dus ik spreek ook Nederlands. So we reintroduced the sheep basically to do the maintenance of the dikes. Commercially, the wool is not viable. You know that. In many parts of the world, it's not viable. But the ecological function of the sheep is very viable. And therefore, I'm introducing you slowly to the new business model, is that you need to have something that I call is multifunctionality. It's not core business, it's multiple business. And this wool is extremely popular in the Netherlands for a very simple reason, that it keeps to maintain the dikes. And the dikes in the Netherlands is survival. With mounting sea levels, all of a sudden the sheep have a very important function to play. And when you have that emotional connection, you change the way people think about the product. It's not wool anymore. It's protecting the Netherlands from a rising sea level. And when you succeed in creating those links, you change completely the connection. And here are my favorite animals, the vicuñas. I wear vicuña. This is a vicuña jacket. I promote vicuña already 25 years. This comes from Peru. Is anyone here from Peru? Los peruanos. Bueno, muy bien. But I helped develop with the previous government, with the government of Macri, to really pay attention to the vicuña in the north of Argentina, because the vicuña is the animal that is considered the #1 priority for maintaining permafrost. If you put a cow on a permafrost, you have massive methane emissions, not just from the cow, but from the unfreezing of the permafrost. But if you have vicuñas, then you actually have a maintenance of the permafrost, and you cut the methane emissions. So the vicuña, for Sergio Bergman at the time, who was the Minister of Environment, was really an opportunity to protect permafrost. It's just like with the Netherlands and the dikes. If you work with an animal, you work with a plant, you work with an invertebrate or a mammal, you need to see its function in the ecosystem. And since there is a great desire of customers to understand the ecosystem, this is one of the opportunities. And then we, of course, learned that what I'm wearing is not the fiber, it's the fleece jacket, because the vicuñas have this wonderful little fleece over their body before the hair grows, and this is the ones we have. But then I learned that this is actually the oldest textiles. For 10,000 years, they've been harvesting this. So this is a tradition. And I'm very glad to know that some of your companies are working on the vicuña, but we need to see how do we market it and how do we get, and now I come to the key, multiple cash flows. How can I generate more revenues from doing so much more? And you will only get more revenue if you have more function. It's the functionality is not, you're not in the clothing business anymore. You are beyond clothing, and the problem is you only see the water and you didn't see the air. And the functionality, I have many works on functionality, but the most important is one of our initiatives with a Taiwanese company called Syntex. When you drink a cup of coffee, you have a lot of waste, and what do you do with the waste? Well, we have developed, of course, the coffee, the Italians know it. We developed the mushrooms, and that's how we met Elena. We started with doing mushroom farming on coffee waste with Lavazza, and that's how we started demonstrating coffee is mushrooms. But if you have mushrooms, the waste from the coffee and from the mushrooms is great feed for the chickens. And then the coffee grounds, we blend 7% coffee grounds in fibers, synthetic fibers, not natural fibers. But we are adding 7% in order to have an odor control in the clothing. Wouldn't you like to have odor control in your clothing? And then we put it into carpets so that the carpets will give always a fresh smell. And we put it into insulation you can put into your refrigerators And now we even put it into paint because coffee, again, has this capacity to resist ultraviolet. The key is that coffee has an odor control, an ultraviolet protection, and helps you to dry faster. If your clothing dries faster, you have less energy. That is the functionality. So who expected a cup of coffee to help to the functionality of textile fibers? And 20 cups of coffee is 1 meter of fabric. 20 cups of coffee. The main and first partner I had is a company from Spain. Who's here from Spain? No hay españoles. You know the company EcoAlf? No? EcoAlf is our first partner and the first one. We now have 2 factories, one in Taiwan and one in Vietnam, that is making textiles with coffee. And now we have expanded to shoes because we understood people are more worried about odors from their feet than for their body sometimes. The functionality of color is something I think we need to address. The textile industry knows perfectly well that most of the color put into the system is going out as a waste of the system. Little sticks. But I am also asking myself, how does nature solve the issue of color? And then I realize that this calamares, this squid, has exquisite colors, but no color pigments. We realized 25 years ago, through research with Macquarie University in Australia, any Australians here? Yes, you know Macquarie. The university, together with Oxford University, identified that these species don't have color pigments. They only make color with a refraction of light, just like this bug is doing. And Elena, you told me yesterday that there is a local bug that does the same. I couldn't find the picture. I tried in the morning, but and I didn't want to wake you up to say, send me the picture. But what is important, this blue you're seeing, and we all know in the color industry that the creation of blue is a very complex color. And then the blue has to remain blue even when it's exposed to the sun. This bug has figured it out. You have this bug dead and 100 years old, it's the same blue. Why? Because it's not chemistry, it's physics. The peacock is the same. The peacock doesn't have color pigments. This is pure refraction of light. The hummingbird does it, and the morpho does it. So why are we not doing it? Why haven't we figured out how to get the most incredible colors? Now, Nike has developed a special product already where you can order your Nike shoes for Jordan model, okay? The Jordan model of Nike for $100,000 with the same colors as the butterfly. And the colors are made just like the butterfly does it. Ladies and gentlemen, color is a highly polluting component. They don't decompose. If you have a great color that stays great over a long time, then you've used heavy metals and you have fixed the color at the cost of the environment. So let me conclude. What's the system? We need to understand what is the business model behind it. And let me take a metaphoric example. This is Yellowstone National Park. The deer go out to graze. And they graze where the grass is the best, that means next to the river. And as a result, the rivers turn into rocks. Rocks means that there is a lot of erosion of the rock. That means the water has high turbidity. That means you will have less fish, because the fish don't have the oxygen anymore. So what do you need to do to have fish again in the rivers? You have to bring back the wolves. As soon as the wolves are back, no deer is going to eat along the rivers anymore because they expose themselves to the wolves. So as a result, the rivers grow back, the grass grows nicely, the grass-feeding fish can eat grass, and they're at the top of the trophic level, and that means that all of a sudden you have a regeneration of the ecosystem. And what do you need? Did you realize that thanks to wolves, we have more fish in the rivers? This is the kind of systemic thinking that I would like you as business entrepreneurs, financiers, analyze it, see how it can work, because you have these clusters that allow you to generate multiple cash flows. And when you have multiple cash flows, you will be generating what in economics we call multipliers. And when you have multipliers, it means your profit levels are higher than you ever expected. Because it's not a linear function, it's a connective function. What you see here is our modeling, mathematical modeling of one island called El Hierro in Spain. And where we looked at how is the interaction of clusters of activities in the local economy. And I do not know if our friends from Spain know El Hierro, but El Hierro is the only cabildo, only community that has full employment in Spain. Why? Because we generate a multiplier effect. We have multiple cash flows. We have multiple functions. And here is the one that I think our sheep need urgently. When you are an animal, or a plant, but let's keep to the animals, we know that life has an end. And what happens at the end of life? You have a carcass. And who in nature takes care of the carcass? I mean, we do this. And what happened to everything that was inside? Well, these buggards are your best partners ever. When there is a cadaver anywhere, flies will immediately come, lay eggs, and within 3-4 days, everything is eaten. Maggots are the protein engines of the world. 1 kilogram of maggot eggs within 4 days is 375 kilograms. Ladies and gentlemen, when you look at fish farming, what are they feeding the fish? Sardines, herrings. Fish farming is go out and fish another type of fish so that you can eat fish. Does this make sense? We have a major challenge on our hands because we need to increase fish protein, but we have been overfishing. And as a result, what is my message to you? My message is that when you want natural fibers, animal fibers in particular, will have such a great potential. You are in need of additional cash flows to make it work. Otherwise, you will have an unpleasant exit from the business. And if you want to increase cash flows, you need to analyze what do you have. And maybe you don't like maggots, and maybe you don't think it's your core business, but if you have 100,000 sheep, then my question to you is, how many tons of maggot protein do you think you can generate? And if you have maggot protein from your carcasses of animals that will die, and waste that will be generated, then you will be fighting overfishing. The systemic business approach is what is going to be working. I have been telling children's stories all my life in order for us to understand that we need to go beyond what we do today. We can't oversimplify the business. We can't only do the data analysis of our businesses. Because I believe that analysis leads to paralysis. We're overanalyzing everything. And what we need is action on the ground where the value of the business is. And that's why I write stories. Not just for children, but also for the children that are alive in you or need to be woken up in you. Let me conclude. I enjoy entrepreneurship. I enjoy innovation. I enjoy changing the rules of the game. You can only be competitive in the market if you succeed in changing the rules of the game. And one of the biggest changes of the rule that we need today is that we need a different leadership on how to run the business. And that is what I hope you will go home with. Change your business. It is innovate or die. But the innovation is the pleasure of a creative function. And if your innovation is focused also on your competitive position because you generate value and that value is translated into cash, then you will be generating the jobs and you will strengthen your position in the market, even when everyone else thinks you can't do it. As long as you believe it can be done, it will be done. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, one more round of applause for Gunter Pauly. Hope you're all as inspired as I am right now and very stimulated. We will move to our next session, which is a very intriguing topic, which is concerning us all. We all are talking about it. It's product environmental footprint. Those who don't know about the product environmental footprint, it's a EU regulation to quantify the product environmental impact throughout its life cycle. And we have a wonderful speaker with us today. It is a pleasure to introduce Baptiste, a prominent figure in sustainability. Please join me in welcoming Baptiste. Please join me in welcoming Baptiste. Thank you.
Merci. Good morning, all of you. Before I start, I will be managing expectation. I don't intend to be as aspirational as what you have just heard now. And thanks again for the very inspiring speech. I'm going to talk about something which is unfortunately a bit less sexy. Indeed, I'm going to talk about the effort that the European Commission, together with the industry, has started. I want to discover the world first. I want to travel. I want to go explore. I want to see a bit more. And then so I left. I left the family, I left the estate, and I traveled. I lived in Eastern Europe, I live in Southeast Asia, and now I live in Amsterdam. But 10 years ago, when my mother came back and said, guys, are you sure you don't want to take over the farm? Because otherwise that means we're going to stop it. That means you will be the generation that will decide to end this family story, that you will be the generation that abandoned this land. And therefore, ultimately, with my brother, we had a big thought and we decided to take it over. And therefore, what we discovered, indeed, and what we went through is all of the challenges of, indeed, when you have a farmer, you cannot double your output 1 year to another. You cannot buy land. You cannot create land that easy. It takes time. You can fight to get 10% more increase in your output. We became organic, suddenly to be told that actually organic wine doesn't get a premium because now everybody is doing organic. There is too many of it. You overinvest into it, and ultimately you are told it will be the same price for you. And still we thrived, we still to push on, and now we're happy to see scared. Again, I'm very grateful for Schneider and for Willy for having invited me here today to be able to give the opportunity to explain what the PEF is, to demystify it a bit. I know the worries that the sector has into what does that mean for our sector? What does that mean if suddenly there is an official calculation that claims that our product, our fibers are the worst in terms of carbon footprint and think, is that yet another reason to see ultimately the uptake of our being reduced? So also here, I'm here to give you a presentation, but I'm staying until tomorrow and until tomorrow lunchtime. So also if after this presentation you have questions about anything that I'm talking about today, don't hesitate to come to me during the break. After the session, I'm going to quickly present you things. Then we have a Q&A with Ravi. Then there is a Q&A with Arun. But again, if you don't have time, take time to come to me after. I'm here also to be able to discuss that, to help into understanding all of this conversation. Also because I was in Munich last week, where I had the privilege to listen at Delena White, that was actually speaking at a panel. And she came back on the origin of the International Wool Trade Organization, and she made a joke about why is it based in Brussels. She mentioned that at the time it was because there was a big war between the wool makers in France and in England, and they were all fighting to manage the IWTO, and that ultimately they came midway and decided to put the office in Brussels. So the slide now is not sexy, doesn't pretend to be. Sorry, don't leave the room yet. Give me a few seconds to explain. So originally, when the European Commission decided to launch the product environmental footprint, what they wanted to do. The European Commission came to the conclusion that the problem is that today, many people can claim that their product have a better carbon footprint, a lowered water footprint, or anything, simply because also there is too many methods that rendered the verification of those very complicated. There was also sometimes opportunism into trying to find a method that was suiting a different type of process, a different approach. And there were very much complexities because those methods were only accessible for the biggest companies that had the money, the internal manpower to work with those, to implement those, but ultimately were letting SMEs and smaller practitioners unable to do the calculation themselves. So the European Commission came with this ambition to be able to create and provide free a method for everybody to use to be able to calculate the footprint, a method which is aimed to be robust, solid, scalable, price effective, and available for anybody. So that was the initial idea. But what are we talking about here actually? What are we creating when we talk about creating a PEF, a product environmental footprint? It's very important to keep in mind that the PEF, the product environmental footprint, technically it's nothing more like a recipe. It's just a recipe. It's not a list of, it's not the ingredients themselves, it's not its output, it's just a description about how do you assemble multiple parts in order to ultimately calculate your footprint, calculate your carbon emission, etc., etc. So that's the work that the Technical Secretariat does on the upper corner. That's a method. So the Technical Secretariat and the work that I'm leading together with all of the other parties is just here to define this recipe under the supervision of the Commission and others, to be able again to provide it. Then this recipe, in order to thrive, like every time you create a cake or anything, or if you create a dye recipe, then you need the dyes. And the dyes will be the database. Those are, in this case, the raw piece of information you need that you will use to calculate your footprint. It's where actually we talk about the carbon footprint of a kilogram of cotton or 1 kilogram of wool. So this is actually part of a database, and we'll come back on that later. But that means that this database, one point important to have in mind, is strictly managed by the European Commission. The Technical Secretariat, the work I'm doing, doesn't interfere with the database. The database, the one that calculates officially the environmental impact to produce 1 kilogram of wool or Vigogne or any other product, it's a data provided by the European Commission and the technical bodies, without interference from the Technical Secretariat. And all of that come together by tools that sometimes you have heard of. The tool of Worldly or the tool of PEFTrust or Carbon Fact are the solutions provider which are there. So it means that all of that come together in a simplified version and that ultimately users will only see on this method not the recipe at the end. A bit when you go to a bakery, when you buy a croissant, you have no clue or you don't need to know the recipe of the croissant, you buy your finished product. Same will be when this method will be implemented. People will be using it, you very likely will be using it through a vendor, through a party, somebody that will have already integrated the method and everything. It will feed on your data, what is the weight of wool that you have put in the garment, what is the type of process, where does the wool come from, etc., etc. Those are information you will provide. They will take from the official database of the Commission, according to the method provided, via a tool, and ultimately they will give you a product footprint. They will tell you this product has this much carbon, this much water, etc., etc. In this slide, I'm not talking about the word sustainable. The PEF, doesn't say anything about what is sustainable or not. The product environmental footprint is just here to tell you how can you calculate in one way a carbon footprint, water footprint, etc. It doesn't tell you if it's good or bad. It doesn't tell you if it's sustainable or not. And it doesn't do anything of the sort. It doesn't also tell you what are the best fibers or not, because this database is not allowed to be used to go public. You just have to use it if you calculate everything, including the use phase, including a full LCA perspective of the product, to be able to come to the footprint. So it doesn't tell you which fiber is more sustainable or not. It doesn't intend to. And it doesn't tell you which product is more sustainable or not. It doesn't intend to. It's just here to give figures. And it's here to give figures following one precept that actually I'm going to take from the former speaker. Just thinking science is my base. That's all. It's here to say what science today tells you and what science can confidently say. There is some shortcoming there. That means sometimes it's not dynamic enough. That means sometimes we suddenly realize that something actually is important or material should have been integrated, but that's too late because we are, and I will come back on that a certain time. But at least he's doing, though, just thinking science is my base. That was for the first element regarding the what is it. So the PEF is a recipe to assemble different parts, some of them provided by the European Commission, some of them provided from your operation, to give you just basic figures following the precept science is my base. What is it also? It's a long process. It started in 2019. That means that when we create a recipe, we have to follow strict guidelines. So it's a bit like if today you do, today you want to do some cooking, you will always go back to Escoffier for the one who like this type of thing. So you always come back to some basic ideas. In this case, the Commission provides strict guidance that you have to abide by if you want to do a PEF. But that means that those guidance were created before 2019. That means they were created by science. The decision of the Technical Secretariat is not the decision of any group. It's the Commission who said in 2015-16, science is not robust enough on this topic, and it was not yet a hot topic, let's say like that. Now this will change, of course, and I will come back on that later. So it's a long process that started in 2019. Actually, the second iteration, the first one started in 2012. I was already working on it. But it's iterative, meaning the PEF of today is not the PEF of tomorrow. It will change. There will be huge opportunity to improve it. And many of the topics that I know are very important for many of you will be integrated in the iteration, and I will come back on that. But it's a key process. It's an open process. There were 2 public consultations. More than thousands of people provided input on the product environmental footprint to better the method. It was actually mandatory under the supervision of the European Commission, with the European Commission seeing every answer, every question asked and every answer provided, to ensure that every stakeholder is properly taken into account. So that's something that was done completely publicly, and all of the method was always released publicly and shown. And finally, it's a process which is at many different steps externally reviewed. Academics, external parties, external to the Technical Secretariat, many of them already working with the Commission or outside of the Commission, review the work, and technically, it's we at the Technical Secretariat have to integrate this work, because ultimately the Technical Secretariat, we can only recommend and suggest a method to the European Commission, but the one to validate it, to say if the work is good or not, is the European Commission. It's not the Technical Secretariat who decides that. And not only there is the European Commission in the work, but there is also NGOs, 2 NGOs actually, which are also together with the Commission attending every meeting, or at least given the opportunity to attend every meeting, so that ultimately they can voice. There is actually many of their recommendations which have been integrated, such as the issue of unsold goods, etc., etc. So it's a long process that went through many steps, and we are aiming, normally now, we're on track. Initially it was supposed to be 2 years, it will have been a 5-year project. So ultimately by 2025, it's done. We will be able to release the final version of the product environmental footprint. So still following through the idea to create a tool which is scalable, which is effective, which is robust, which is peer-reviewed externally, all that under public scrutiny of civil society and the European Commission, and which is just, again, a part of the journey. The journey will carry on, and we are confident, and everybody is actually working on that, which has already seen the improvement of the method of the tool over time, that future iteration will only go better to make sure that the complexity of the value chain, the different realities that this simple sentence like to aim to measure the environmental footprint, to measure that it can encompass even more complexity while still remaining simple to use for anybody. So this is just an introduction element. Now I'm looking forward to some questions and then Q&A with all of you.
Thank you so much, Patrice. We have some questions prepared for you. I'm pretty sure that everyone in the audience is eager to learn more. Just for our audience, why do products made from natural fibers, particularly animal fibers, have a higher environmental footprint in product environmental footprint assessments? And what are the key limitations in improving those numbers?
That's actually one of the key questions. And that's why I was very keen at the beginning to make the distinction between the recipe and with the database. If ultimately when you cook a dish, the dish is maybe has too many fat or too many sugar, not because in itself of the recipe, just because you use butter or you use other ingredients with themselves a higher impact. And today, when we look at the data we are receiving from the European Commission, the data of many of the natural products is actually showing, on this particular section, a higher impact than the others. And therefore, that means that when you compile that with all of the other information, we know that statistics will show that approximately 60, 70, 80, depending on how you take it, % of the impact of the garment of a product comes from its raw material. The other stage have a significance, but very often less so. Therefore, that means that the main reason today, if I just look at deconstructing the element, why the environmental footprint of product made with natural fibers will tend to show with a higher footprint, comes from the fact that simply the data that we have in the database is actually very often showing a higher footprint for those material versus the other one. At the same time, that's something that can be improved. I know that IWTO is already working with the European Commission to actually better the data of the that the European Commission has. And that's exactly the step to go forward. In order to reduce the environmental footprint of those products, first you will need to have more maybe representative data, better data that average the industry, and that can be done in collaboration with the European Commission and all of its parties. At the same time, there is now thinking again about innovation and collaboration. Again, when I referred to the event in Munich that was happening, besides the speech of IWTO, there was a very amazing show, actually a speech, given by 3 different cotton associations that were explaining how they all came together to define how to create a data which is indeed potentially out of date, which is not matching anymore with the reality, particularly in the very changing landscape we are living in. Maybe this type of collaboration will be a nice way in the future to ensure that the data used will be better, and ultimately the footprint perceived and shown will be of better quality.
Of course, we all need to collaborate to improve the data, and I think the dynamic change and of incorporating the latest and the most up-to-date data will definitely help to improve those numbers. But that's up to the raw material stage. What happens when the product is in use? Because wool, as we all know, requires less washing, it's relatively more durable, doesn't have microplastics. And why are these benefits not reflected in PEF?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Simply because you use the word "as we all know." And as we all know, is not science. Simply because it has been asked many times to the industry to provide data study. Show us, demonstrate it, that this can happen. After years of asking that to the industry, and I hope I will make it alive today, we received a study that was created in 1988. At this time, I was in primary school. And that's a study that was sent, therefore, to demonstrate that indeed, in some cases, based on some data in the US, there is less wash needed of some product. The only way is that this will be better reflected if there were much better studies to be able to demonstrate that this is actually the case. That's all. That's simple. When you say science is my base, when you look at any scientific paper, no scientific will say, oh, I know that, hence it's true. That doesn't exist. You make a paper explaining why it is true, and then you take this paper and you say, this is why it is true, and so be it. So here the main issue was that there was no, for many reasons, I know it's complex, it's super easy for me to say it's needed, it's more complicated to put into place, it also requires resources. I understand there is many constraints, but the simple fact is that there was a lack of data just to be able to illustrate this that prevented many changes into this case. So this was an ask that was received in many consultations, many times, and the question always came back. In these cases, it was not show me the money, it was show me the data. Show me the data, and the data never came. So I'm very confident that in the future, that being mentioned, that there will be this data, and that future iteration of the footprint and the method will be better because there will be more robust data that prove unequivocally that indeed it's a fact that garments are less washed. Actually, I had heard that so much that I'm not using my icebreaker t-shirt because I'm interviewed by VF Corporation, but actually because I went on a hike and I was indeed checking and I thought, okay, some time for me also to experience myself how it works. So I could also myself say I know that on a hike you don't wash your wool t-shirt every day, but you cannot do that with a cotton t-shirt. But again, I know doesn't suffice. Show me the data.
Yep, definitely. We'll need to work on those studies, and sure people in the room will find ways to get that numbers and to prove that indeed natural fibers, particularly animal fibers, requires less maintenance and are relatively more durable. And then at the end of life, when you have the product impact, when it's left in the environment or it's given a second life, how does the product environmental footprint methodology account for those numbers? Because wool is one of the most recycled fiber. The most used fiber is polyester, which is only 14% of the polyester is recycled. So how that gap is addressed in PEF?
Yeah. That gap actually is addressed in PEF in among the 300 pages. If you look for something which is an awful name, it's called the CFF, the circular formula. And the circular formula exactly aims at calculating this aspect. I will be honest with you. Even in the technical secretariat, there is a handful of PhD who understand it. It's complex. I will not be able to explain it to you. I know it exists, and I know what it does. So therefore, I can only tell you that. So virtually, technically, in this system, it's exactly creating scenarios per type of fibers that people are allowed to change, again, if they have the evidence, so to better account for the product, where exactly this type of data is used. When you use a fiber, the idea of creating this product environmental footprint compared to its first version, we're already to recognize that we are moving away, and also thanks to some pioneers, we're moving away from a linear model to a circular model. So the idea to introduce this circularity was to include a circular formula. So it's exactly what's happening. People can argue it doesn't go fast enough, it doesn't go strong enough, but it's there. It's a method which is provided by the European Commission. We can modify certain parameters. Actually, we think it can definitely be improved also. But today, there is a formula that accounts exactly for that. Different scenarios about what's happening for the fibers when they are in their end of life. That's the first point. But the most important point is just to be able to say that it's one thing to be able to give a bonus to a garment which is using virgin material to say maybe it can be recycled. But the key element is actually the way that the PEF is created and the database is granular enough that if you are using recycled wool, or if you are using recycled whatever cotton, then your footprint nearly goes to zero, because the environmental impact of the recycled fiber comes to so little, and there is actually the data that you can just click on I'm using recycled wool, and then the footprint that you project will be nearly zero, because the footprint of the raw material will be drastically reduced, and that's already accounted in the system. There is already the data for that. That's just a click away. So therefore, by those two elements, first already giving bonus for those natural fibers to enable and agree that yes, they are circular, that's already in the method. And yes, if you are directly yourself using recycled material, your footprint will drastically reduce, and this is recognized by the system.
That's a good news. So we understand the end of use and end of life now, and we also understand the limitations of the raw material. But then going back to the raw material, and we have a lot of people in the room, a lot of brands, a lot of supply chain partners. We're all trying to improve the way we harvest wool. And we are all trying innovative technology where we are more harmonized with the nature. How does those methods and strategies and all the practices that we're incorporating at the farm level will help improve the PEF scores of animal fibers?
That's a very good question. I will tackle that into many ways. The first thing is to say that anyway, on this particular question, I will still come back to the same thing. Science is my base. Is there the scientific evidence to be able to demonstrate the actual environmental benefit of what you are doing? I'm on my farm. I come back to my farm. On my farms, we started to develop a new way of growing wine. We do what's so-called agroforestry, which means that instead of having a full vineyard in front of you, we do 10 rows of vineyard, one hedge with big trees. 10 rows of vineyard, one hedge. From an LCA perspective, that's a disaster. I'm lowering my yield per surface, hence the footprint of what I provide is higher, and the benefit of my hedge, biodiversity and other elements, are not today scientifically measured. So therefore, I'm doing something because out of conviction, but recognizing that if I have to demonstrate the benefit of it, except maybe a little bit of carbon sequestration, that will be already another topic to discuss, that's something that will be very difficult to prove. So today, as per the scientific framework, the question is that are the benefits which are provided? In the video, there was a sentence said that we have difficulty to, and there was a problem with the word sustainable because there was no proper definition. The problem was that there was with the word sustainable because there was no proper definition. The problem was that there was no definition, that there was too many definitions of what sustainable is. And ultimately, legislators said, now we ban you. So just a key distinction to have in mind that ultimately the first sentence of the law in the future, about what you can say to the consumer, it's science-based, it's data-based. And it's not something that could trigger too many definitions in the mind of the consumer. It has to be very clear. How many boxes does the word regenerative ticks?
It is science-based, and I'm sure there are a lot of people in the room who are working to prove and have numbers to associate with those practices. I'm sure that those will be shared and will be incorporated. My last question, and I think just a future forward question, after the implementation, how do you see the evolution of PEF? What will it eventually become?
Yeah, so there is a few things. The PEF, again, today, it's a moving piece. What is true about the PEF today will not be true about the PEF necessarily tomorrow. The basic will remain. It always be science-based driven. It always be a public approach. It always aim to normalize how you calculate the footprint. But the background method, the framework the Commission provides is not good enough. It will be evolving. It will require the inclusion of impacts such as microplastic and others. It will have to have a hard look about how does it measure biodiversity. Is it going far enough on that? What about the circularity recognition? Is it going far enough? So in the next 2 years, the European Commission actually will be evolving its framework, not only for the sector. The framework is available for every service and consumer good. There is PEF being done for the pet food industry. There is PEF being done for the ski industry. The hotel industry has its own PEF paid by the European Commission for those ones. So therefore, that means that the general framework will be evolving to match everybody. That's the first point. Because then ultimately the PEF will be used by regulation. And the law is already passed. For the one of you that know about the eco-design for sustainable product regulation, I'm not going there now. That will be another couple of presentations. But it's a law that will standardize what type of requirement does any consumer good in the future will have to be allowed on the market. This law, which is finished, which is passed, already gives one definition of the environmental footprint. It's a one which is calculated by the PEF. Doesn't allow anything else. So now that this law is already passed since a few months, the key element is that therefore how will that work for the future and how we can improve the method, how we can improve the data behind the method, how the method can be more dynamic to be able to recognize new and innovative techniques to ensure regenerativeness, to ensure other elements, so that ultimately this is not left behind, and that this can ultimately be recognized by upcoming legislation that will be leveraging this method or approaches for the many years to come. So now that we know the boundaries of the work that will be done around the PEF, how we can collaboratively work to make this approach better.
Thank you so much, Baptiste. One round of applause for Baptiste before we go on questions. So now we open for the audience to ask Baptiste questions. If you have any questions, raise your hand and I can walk and come.
Well, thank you for giving me the floor first. I mean, I'm not part of the audience perhaps, but I would like to correct the term science is my base, because I think we differ very fundamentally, and the difference is Anglo-Saxon thinking and Germanic thinking. What is the word for science in German? Wissenschaften. Es ist Wissenschaft. Wissenschaft means you create knowledge. You don't make knowledge a goddess, and you don't make data your master. Wissenschaften in the German term, in the Germanic term, really means what you have implied, the need for a permanent questioning of what you think you know. And the greatest lack I find in PEF, which is disastrous for natural services, is the ecosystem services. Ecosystem services means I wear a vicuña. A vicuña, you can make your calculation, and I know with your calculation I will come out disastrous. But from an ecosystem service, I am permitting permafrost, and that has been proven. The problem is the Commission doesn't accept the integration of the two today, if that's true or not. If we can integrate ecosystem services, and not only the end of the life, but the ecosystem service, you know, I am just asking the question, well, how does it compare to have polyethylene made from fracking gas, which is not permitted in Europe, the fracking in many countries, they're fighting for it. But the ecosystem disservice of fracking leads to a very great performance on your PEF.
So, a few things.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's not... So one point. You don't differ with my view. I'm just a facilitator. So in this case, but honestly, you disagree, in this case, with the perspective of the European Parliament, the European Commission, and its elected body. Voilà, so so it's not my view, so it's a view of the three elected bodies. The only thing I can tell for them, because again, as a farmer, I know my problems, and I know how the limitation of the LCA are for my products. But that's my view. That's not what enters into the game here. In the conversation here is that what are policymakers making, and what are they doing? We can go on and on to talk about the data is not enough. I agree with you. The data is not good enough today, it's not perfect. But that means we have to stop measuring what we can. Are you challenging also the IPCC report? Are you also challenging the effort of the civilization today to measure its carbon footprint? Let me finish my sentence. And therefore, the thing is that to say that indeed, again, there is many of those limitations. We could talk about consequential LCA. I'll be more than happy to talk about that. But how mature it is as a topic, how robust it is today to make it a standard. So the only thing is that we just, and that's a sentence you've heard, that it's always an issue about not letting not good enough, the perfection to be the enemy of good enough. Everybody would love for the complexity and the sophistication that you aim for to already be the norm today. And I'm the first one. But the reality is that we have to operate collectively within the boundaries which are given to us by democratically elected bodies. We can discuss about the imperfection of those. That's very valid. But that's simply the reality. So indeed, we can think about this ecosystem issue. We can think about how we can take into account more externalities. And again, the PEF, when I started working on it, had 9 indicators. Now there is 16 indicators. In its future iteration, there will be 20 indicators. And I'm sure that in 10 or 20 years, there will be 30, 40 indicators. But does that mean that collectively, as an industry, we should think, let's not talk about carbon footprint collectively because the method is not robust enough? And therefore, we should not also engage in trying to do what we can do there? So, indeed, the method is not perfect. There is complexities. But the method is created and the boundaries are given to us by democratically elected parties. And I strongly believe that this is much better than having different actors picking and choosing their own approach. And it's not my method, it's the one of the European Commission, the European Parliament, and everybody who voted for it.
Okay. Let's take one more question from the audience. Anyone else? I'll come back and take this one.
Thanks. Ian Whiteford from Sustainable Fibre Alliance. Can I just ask, it's maybe a more technical question about it. So, because we heard from Gunther about different products coming from one source. So let's take an example of cashmere goat up there. There would be cashmere fibre, certainly, which would have its PEF. But there's going to be, at the end of life, meat. There's milk, obviously, as well. How would you partition the PEF among those different products? And is that not, to some extent, more a value judgment than pure science, say? Because there's, and if there was some new technology that gave a different product, say the maggot thing, you know, how do you partition the PEF among all those products from one animal?
Thank you for your question. That's a very good question. If I don't mistake, that's the issue of allocation. How do you allocate the footprint on the meat versus the wool and other topics like that? That's a key one. That's a key one, and today, indeed, the guidance of the Commission don't go far enough to dictate an approach. That's up to the one that will produce the data in many cases. For the one familiar with the issue, then this issue, I come back to the war between France and UK into wool making, is weaponized by some countries in some ways. You know that France has developed a method, because they were aiming at some point before the dissolution to mandate the disclosure of carbon footprint. And they have mandated, I forgot if it was economical or things, but I know it was in the interest of the French wool farmers, which will benefit of a different allocation than Australian or Anglo-Saxon farmers. But why was that possible? For one simple reason, because the industry was not able to come with one voice. The moment the industry, because of division, because of different perspective, comes with different approaches, different elements, that means that you give way to policymakers to select whatever approach they want. And therefore, in this particular case, that could be definitely when I mentioned, for instance, on the conversation on the cotton, that's exactly one of the first things the cotton agree. And in this case, they took the biophysical approach. I will not explain it to you now, I will be in pain, but I know they agreed all together that collectively they will adhere to one approach only of allocation, and they make that the norm of their new approach about how we as an industry agree to do so. And that will have been an amazing, and this is not done in silo, this was done in collaboration not only with the cotton producers, but the cotton association, with the brand, the entire ecosystem of the industry. And therefore, in this particular case, there was an amazing opportunity to discuss that, and maybe in the guidance document in a future iteration.
Now we will have a well-deserved coffee break and snacks. It's a wonderful opportunity to recharge, exchange ideas, and network with fellow attendees. So we have approximately 30 minutes of 20? 15 minutes of coffee break because we ran over time. Extremely sorry about that. Enjoy the break. Look forward to see you after the break.
Lucky.